Hello and welcome everyone. Our talk today is the Shell Games Accessibility Matrix, Investing Your Scope Wisely. My name is Alexis Miller. I'm Director of Product Management at Shell Games.
And I'm Francisco Suki, and I'm a Principal Design Manager at Shell Games. And I was also the Design Director for I Expect You to Die 2.
So the focus of this talk is to describe a process and tool we developed to help teams plan, budget for, and accomplish more accessibility goals, even with no or limited budget for accessibility-specific features. By being intentional about accessibility and using a tool we created called the Accessibility Matrix, we were able to accomplish a lot without costly accessibility features. And I think that's the big takeaway today, is that this isn't the game with the most accessibility features, but it's doing the most with the least amount available. So today we're going to cover why we care about accessibility, what some of our past attempts look like, techniques and step-by-step instructions on using the tool we developed called the Accessibility Matrix. And then Francisco is going to walk through how we actually used the Accessibility Matrix during the development of the VR game I Expect You to Die 2. And at the end, we're going to share a link so everyone can have access to a public copy of the Accessibility Matrix and all its future improvements and versions. So we assume you're listening to this talk because you care about accessibility. So we'll be brief in sharing why we care about accessibility. Number one is that we really want as many people as possible to enjoy our games. And it's a good reminder that many accessibility features end up being used by way more people than the people they were specifically designed for. We see this a lot with the use of subtitles, with volume controls, all kinds of things that end up being used by probably way more people than we expect. And players who could not previously play your game at all are given a new opportunity. Secondly, Shell Games' mission is to create experiences we're proud of with people we like so we can make the world a better place. In line with that mission, there is a growing grassroots effort at the studio to promote awareness and importance of accessibility in our games, and especially in the VR world. Third is that we really believe that it's our secret weapon to innovation, because when you add new design challenges or constraints, that's when you come up with more creative solutions. So we're going to be real honest here. What were our accessibility practices like before the Accessibility Matrix? Accessibility at Shell Games was random, inconsistent, and overwhelming, despite a desire to do more and to do better. And Francisco has been here longer than me, so he's going to share some more details on this.
Thanks, Alexis. I want to start by showing this email that I'm sure many of you have either sent or received a version of. This is from 2013. I've been at Shell for over about 12 years now. So this is how we were doing things in the past, right? This is someone emailing me saying, hey, you're colorblind, right? Can you come over to my desk and check out a thing? Check if it's colorblind friendly? Well, there was a lot of just working from a very limited knowledge of, wanting to do better, but also not really knowing much about how or who we're helping or how to help them. So sort of doing what we can with the people that we had and what they knew, what they happened to know at the company. So we wanted to fix this. So the year was around 2018, 2019, when Sabrina Soliva, one of our designers at Shell, put together this 160 item giant list of all these great things you could be doing, you could be thinking about to make your games more accessible. It came from a desire to be better, to do better, to be better informed, but it had weirdly kind of the similar opposite problem where now it was too much. So now we were engaging with this, was a little too costly, was a little too intimidating. So we didn't really know how. So around that time is when we were starting planning for I Expect You to Die 2. And I went to Alexis, who was in the product department, and I said, so we have a pretty good idea of the thing we're going to make. We know what we want to make. We know how much we can spend on it. And I'm really interested in first trying to identify how I can have the highest impact, reach the most amount of people with some amount of accessibility considerations, spending the least amount of budget, because our budget was very limited and our accessibility specific budget was pretty much non-existent. So anything that we had to do, we had to start by brainstorming some creative solutions. And the only way really to brainstorm those solutions was understanding who we were trying to help and how we might be able to help them. So again, the year was 2019, and think about where you were in 2019, and maybe maybe the field has advanced a ton since then. We certainly have at Shell Games. So this was the sort of the seed that sprouted the Matrix. Two other designers at Shell, Miriam Harris and Mel Harkey, were also in similar situations. So we all came to Alexis at the same time. And the final goal here was how to budget for attainable features and design our games to meet the goals that the game had without needing new features and reaching the most amount of people possible. So Alexis is going to talk about how that process went.
Yeah, so here is a snapshot of what our entire accessibility matrix looks like. Reminder, we're going to share this spreadsheet at the end of the talk. So we were able to go from the 160 things that were super well researched, very comprehensive, super detailed, to just 34 accessibility goals grouped by 9 high-level categories. And so these categories and goals were based on the research of our former colleague who created the detailed spreadsheet, but with the goal of making this more digestible and easier for teams to use. So next slide, we're going to zoom in so we can look at it more closely. First of all, I want to point out one really important thing is that the timing of when to complete this tool is critical. The earlier in the process, the better. So we schedule it in pre-production, so before scope and schedule are finalized. And the earlier these decisions can be made, the less costly they'll be, and the more that we can accomplish in terms of accessibility goals. I also want to call out that we name each line an accessibility goal, not an issue or a problem. We intentionally frame each goal in affirmative language. We also don't call them accessibility features because, as you'll see here, you can accomplish goals without features, and there can be multiple ways to meet the goals. So this encourages creativity rather than just a checklist of features like, oh, you have to do this, you have to do that. So I'll read the first row as an example. So we have a category for comfort and 4 goals within that category: sensory overload, motion sickness, green room, and content comfort. The goal for sensory overload is described as players find the visual and sound effects to be enjoyable, including those with sensory sensitivities. So then the first step of using the matrix is that the teams go line by line through the matrix and they brainstorm potential solutions to all relevant accessibility goals. It doesn't mean that they're all doable, but it's just really a brainstorm of what could be done. It also doesn't mean that we're expecting to accomplish all of the goals, but we found it's really valuable to do this exercise because there could be low-hanging fruit that you're otherwise missing, or the team could come up with some pretty cool creative solutions that no one considered before this brainstorm exercise. So an analogy I like to use is that it's kind of like thinking of this part like being at a frozen yogurt shop. So you walk into the frozen yogurt shop, you really should take the time to look at all the possible frozen yogurt toppings, the sprinkles, the Oreos, M&Ms, before you just start dumping the sprinkles on your yogurt, because you could be missing out on some pretty awesome toppings. So step by step, This is the process that our dev team goes through with the matrix. Step one is brainstorming. So as I mentioned before, many of these accessibility goals may be accomplished essentially for free through intentional universal design. In fact, the best solutions are often the ones that do not require additional features or added scope. On a related note, our process does acknowledge and encourage that multiple solutions can often accomplish the same goal. So the team doesn't need to feel constrained by writing just one idea for each potential solution. So one example that I have shared a lot with teams that are going through this is that in order to make text in a game easier to read for players, and we're talking virtual reality games, you could have a feature to change the size of the text, or you could put that text on an object in the virtual world that can be pulled closer or further away from the player's eyes, like you might do in real life if, say, you misplaced your glasses and you're trying to read a menu. You could also do both, right? You could have a feature with increasing the text size, and you could have that object with text be movable. The next step is that team members complete a survey. So the survey has all these items on the matrix, and the survey is asking team members to help prioritize each goal on the matrix. We tend to use Moscow, but you could really use any ranking system that's comfortable for your team. Step 3 is estimating scope. And these are, again, really rough estimates. T-shirt sizing is typically what we end up using. And then step 4 is that the team identifies where a feature really is required to accomplish a goal. For example, we have yet to find a way to make our games, understandable by people that speak other languages without a subtitle system. So if that's going to be a goal that we prioritize, then we acknowledge, yes, that is a big feature that we're going to need. The next part of the process is that we do competitive analysis to help aid in the prioritization and decision-making process. So since there have been now approximately 10 projects at Schell Games that have used the accessibility matrix in some capacity, our product and market research actually is now a lot of internal examples and best practices. So we're sharing that information with each other at Schell Games. And one cool thing that we've seen is that several of the goals have really become fairly standard now. So some examples are, playtesting our game with players with varying abilities and diverse backgrounds. That's something that we have systems in place. We have resources to get those kind of playtesters. Yes, that's something that we can do. We've also really standardized being mindful of visual and sound effects that may not be enjoyable to players with sensory sensitivity. We have multiple ways of evaluating flashing. We've standardized having volume controls for most of our games. And we're also working across our games on creating options to reduce motion sickness and sharing that information. So whether these things are coming from things you've already done or from the greater market, it is useful to see, what else is out there, what's being done. And this aspect of it, the product market research, is done by myself, and we now have a slightly larger product department, so I have people to help me, which is great. But it could be done by the dev team, marketing, researchers, etc. And the purpose of this part of the matrix is really to supplement the team's brainstorming with additional examples and some industry context to the prioritization decision making. So one of the things when I'm looking at, hey, what's going on in the industry is essentially I rank it as, is this something that's pretty rare? Is it common, or is this just expected? So you may want to prioritize things that are so common they're considered expected, because if your game doesn't do it, that could be bad. On the flip side, you may also prioritize rare goals because they could become differentiators for your game and something that people look at and say, oh, wow, like, did you see what that game is doing? So, lastly, as with all game development, there's always way more that you want to do, but you can't fit in due to time, resources, and budget. Because if everything is a priority, then nothing is a priority. So, we really need to do the hard work of cutting scope and building your schedule and budget to accomplish your highest priority accessibility goals. So, Francisco is now going to share with you some specific examples of how we use the accessibility matrix in practice during the development of I Expect You to Die Too.
Thank you, Alexis. Start with the briefest description of I Expect You to Die Too. It is a virtual reality game. It is an escape the room secret agent puzzle adventure game, which has been received really well in again, virtual reality. I also want to say it is not an exemplary game when it comes to accessibility. We have close to none specific accessibility comfort settings in the game, but I truly feel proud of the job we did with the budget that we had, and I will walk you through that. At the time when we were planning the game, we didn't have any budget reserved for accessibility. And I will say the game doesn't have a settings menu even, but still, we were able to do quite a bit. And we were able to do quite a bit thanks to the accessibility matrix. And I feel like it allowed us to accomplish more than expected with the minimal budget that we had. If I could do it again, what I would ask for is dedicated accessibility budgets so I could accomplish more. And I would use the same process, and that process scales so that it can adjust to the budget that you have. Before I Expect You to Die Too, I was hesitant to engage in accessibility discussions, mostly because of this fear of getting it wrong. I was afraid of just doing something that would offend someone, would insult someone. I didn't really know too much about the accessibility world. And that is the magic. That is the main thing the Matrix did for me, was inform me early so that I could use that information to plan for a better game. It helped me understand who I was designing for, and it helped me sort of open my eyes to all the people that I could be helping, all the people that all of a sudden would be able to play this game, if only I helped them overcome some sort of barrier that would prevent them from playing it otherwise. And the biggest win here was that because our budget was pretty much zero for accessibility, we had to make all these decisions that were quote unquote free, right? Like we had to come up with ways to help people without making new features. And here is a list. When I say free or close to free, right? I think some of these definitely have a cost. I'm not saying by hire a sensitivity reader. I'm not saying find a friend who will do the work for free. Absolutely not. But the vast majority of these decisions are just that. They're decisions. They are someone who understands who they're trying to help, drawing a line and saying, in our case, for example, our game will be able to be played beginning to end, one-handed. You will be able to 100% our game, every speedrun, every side objective, every mission will be completable with the use of one hand only. And we're not going to have a one-handed feature. It's just that's just how the game is going to be. And that is something we're able to do for a few aspects of the game. So then where my job comes in is in upholding these decisions. The process that I used was this process we call the master design guide, right? So for a little extra context, in this game, I was new to the franchise. So part of my work coming into the game was understanding what's the secret sauce that makes an I Expect You to Die level. And that resulted in this 60-item list that I would use in every milestone to check that we were on track with this level, right? And what I did was I blended in accessibility decisions, accessibility considerations into the same checklist, and I gave them the same weight that I would give things like, are people understanding our puzzles? Do people understand what their goal is in the mission? That was carrying the same weight as, can this level be completed one-handed? Are we accounted for a variety of body types, right? So here's a peek at what a tiny bit of that design master guide looks like, and we will track at each milestone. We will fill one of these columns, and we just tag in yellow when we thought like, no, maybe we're not hitting this goal right now, or we would leave it untagged if we felt like we were on track. So the question that would come up once in a while, or the concern, would be this concern of, but what are you giving up? You're making these decisions, and by making these decisions, aren't you just taking a huge amount of fun stuff, cool stuff that you could be having in your game, and you're just like setting it aside just for the benefit of like, how many people are you helping with this? Wouldn't you rather have all this cool stuff? So I hope that it's not you listening to this talk who is asking this question, but maybe it is, and maybe maybe you're both asking and receiving this question. Maybe this question is more being asked of you than you being the one asking it. And of course, what I want to do when I'm asked this question is to say, nope, I am giving nothing up. Carry on. But that can be as frustrating as you receiving this question, right? Like, it's frustrating for everyone when this is not an open dialogue. And so the way that I like to think about it, and the way I like to think about every single design decision, is there is not one set of decisions that will take you from 0 to a great game. It's not like there's one path, and if you make the right decisions across that path, you will end up with a wonderful game. I like to think about it as a universe of wonderful games that exist. And we only need to find one wonderful game within all of those perfectly wonderful games. And one subset of those games checks all the accessibility boxes that we outline at the start of the project. And some other subset doesn't. And if they're equally wonderful, then shouldn't it be a no-brainer that we would go for the game that the most amount of people can play, that is equally wonderful as all the other games? Of course, the trick there is that one might be harder to find, but it is absolutely there, and it is absolutely fine. So you are still on track to make a great game. And once I saw it with those eyes, the choice just became so clear to me. That is not to say there weren't moments of tension, because this question did come up. This question would come up once in a while, right? Here's one example of when it came up. Someone in the team would have the idea. We have a level that takes place in a private jet, and they would come up and say, I had this wonderful idea for the jet. I think we should let players use their telekinetic powers to aim out the window, grab the wing of the jet, and steer the jet with telekinesis. The tension there was that action would absolutely result in motion sickness for a whole host of people. And we felt pretty confidently that we wouldn't get to, without a special feature to account for this specific type of motion sickness, we're not going to get to a level we felt comfortable with the amount of motion discomfort. So we had to find an alternative. But we were in love with this idea of using your telekinesis powers to control something outside of the jet. So we capture from that what we thought was the coolest part, which was this literal thinking outside the box, outside the hull of the jet. And we come up with a different puzzle that still involved interacting with the jet wing at a distance, but did not result in motion for the player. The two-handed one was one that came up so often. Our job, a big part of it is to come up with cool objects, cool interactions that can be puzzly, can be can fulfill a secret agent fantasy, and a lot of those have two hands. So a lot of different points, different devs throughout the creative process would come up with these two-handed ideas. And this is one where you're absolutely looking at just like the universe of cool stuff that exists in the world. And this was just a hard no for me. So this one would usually result in tension because it would immediately be met with a no. We made a decision at the start that we would not have objects that can be operated with two hands or require being operated with two hands. So it is a job of trying to redirect that creative power and say, surely we can think about objects that fulfill a similar role, allow us to achieve the same secret agent fantasy, but can only be operated with one hand, right? And if all else fails, right, we would have objects like, you see this little wheel there at the bottom of the screenshot? You can tell that wheel has a handle, because generally if you saw a wheel like that, you would want to operate it with two hands. And so we really wanted to have a wheel in that specific situation. So we designed a one-handed wheel that has a handle so you can only operate it with one hand, and it does not support the use of two hands. So there's always that option if you must commit to an item like that. This was a wonderful one because it started with, again, motion. Let's get players to descend into this level, kind of like a Mission Impossible movie. You're descending through this laser trap, and again we were bumping against this but motion. Our game. We're not planning for it to have any motion of the player. We didn't have tools to help the player not get motion sick, so we weren't sure really what to do with this. But we loved the idea, and it was using a type of motion that should be mostly safe in virtual reality. So what we ended up doing was just investing a fair amount of time into testing it to make sure we could come up with a version of this motion that was acceptable without specific motion features for it. So in that sense, this particular implementation was not free, but it did allow us to sort of absolutely deliver on this you're sneaking in secret agent fantasy. So this was a situation in which we did end up spending budget to achieve something that was deemed as super cool, because we thought it was so great, so cool, that it was worth spending the extra budget to also make it accessible. And for this one here, our game values speedruns. It's one of the things we recognize. It's one of the things that we love to have in our levels. The recognition of speeding through it as fast as you can. But speedruns are way, you're able to move much faster if you have use of both hands and you're able to do two actions at the same time. So what we had settled on is our whole game, including the speedruns, should be completed one-handed. And I love the result of this one because this is truly an example of constraints breeding exemplar creativity. What ended up happening was that not only can our content all be completed one-handed, but the majority of our speedruns, the way you shave time off of your level, off of your run, to be able to get in there under this time that we stipulate, it's usually more of a logic puzzle than it is a dexterity puzzle. Dexterity will help you get there. It might help you get that final mile. But more often than not, if you're trying to save a good amount of time, what you're looking for is a different way to solve a specific puzzle in the level that is more efficient, that is faster, that allows us to skip a part of the level. So this was an example where the constraint of requiring only one hand ended up revealing to us that there was a more puzzly approach to speedruns that made the game better. So next up, Alexis is going to wrap it up for us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Francisco. Every time I hear you talk about that stuff, I'm like, oh, so cool. So in summary, the goal of the Matrix was to create something comprehensive that would actually be used by teams, something that was not overwhelming or intimidating, something that inspired creativity and pushed us to increase the accessibility of our games, even without a big budget or an accessibility budget at all. So we hope that you might use our tools for your games too. But even if you don't want to use our exact matrix, we want to share some key strategies that can help you reach more accessibility goals with less scope. First, and most important one is start talking about accessibility early. It should occur during pre-production, before all features are scoped, and before the schedule is final. Number 2 is to have some kind of written guide, because just talking about it in meetings is probably not going to be enough to make sure that it actually happens. Number 3 is to approach accessibility like other features in your game. Recognize that you can't do everything, and there's also usually a sliding scale for the size and scope of various solutions. You have a limited budget and scope, so prioritize accessibility features as you would other features in the game. It's okay to prioritize. We can't accomplish this alone, so let's keep working and sharing to end unusable, inaccessible games, because we don't want to have anyone ever see this kind of review. So lastly, as promised, here is a link to a blank template of our accessibility matrix. It's a Google Sheet viewable by anyone with a link. We hope that you'll find it useful, and we're planning on making updates to it. In fact, I have some updates in the works. So the plan is to keep this link with that new information as it evolves. So feel free to copy it, use what works for you, and we'd love to hear your feedback. So thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.